Alice stood in the absolute center of a transparent cube, suspended in the velvet void between the stars of the Orion belt. There was no air to carry sound, only the hum of her own nervous system. Outside the walls of her prison, the universe stretched out, a terrifying infinity of cold light and ancient silence. This was Solitary Cell Zero, a masterpiece of Archon architecture designed for those whose crimes threatened the very fabric of causality. Alice, a mere ship's engineer used to the smell of grease and the cold touch of steel, had been accused of causal disruption. She had simply wanted to save her crew from a collapsing sun, unaware that in the eyes of the Galactic Council, saving 10 lives at the cost of altering a timeline was a crime worse than genocide. Around the cube, the judges began to manifest. They were not beings of flesh and bone, but colossal, semi-transparent geometric projections of the Archons. The supreme custodians of galactic order. Instead of heads, perfect tetrahedrons and glowing spheres pulsed with a rhythmic, clinical light. Their voices didn't travel through the air, they resonated directly within Alice's mind, sounding like the grinding of diamonds against glass. Object 74 Alice, the sphere intoned, its voice devoid of empathy. Your action preserved 10 insignificant lives but shifted the destiny of an entire sector 1,000,000 years from now. You have introduced chaos into the equation of harmony. Your sentence is dematerialization. You shall cease to be today, and you shall never have existed yesterday. Just as the Archons prepared to erase Alice's signature from the universe, the space around the chamber convulsed. This was not the elegant, silent folding of space used by the judges. It was a violent, screaming rip in the continuum. Out of a blinding white flash emerged the Wanderer, an old, radiation-scarred scout shuttle, held together by welds, prayers, and sheer stubbornness. It looked like a rusted bucket compared to the divine constructs of the Archons. From its airlock stepped Captain Mark. His eyes were bloodshot from G-force, his beard singed, and in his hands, he gripped a chaotic tangle of wires, glowing diodes, and scrap metal. He looked small, fragile, and utterly out of place. "Enough!" Mark roared. His voice, amplified by the suit's speakers, sounded like primitive thunder to the Archons. "You call yourselves gods because you can count the stars, but you've forgotten what it feels like to be alive." The judges flickered in agitation. They couldn't comprehend how this primitive biological unit had bypassed the security of the null dimension. "Mortal," the tetrahedron replied, its edges sharpening with cold intent. "Your presence here is an anomaly. We shall delete you along with her." Mark only gripped his device tighter, a grim smile touching his lips. "Try it. This is a paradoxical detonator. It's slave to my heartbeat. If I die, or if you touch Alice, this entire sector collapses into a state of temporal decay. You will vanish with us." The Archons froze. For beings who lived for eternity, the concept of temporal decay, the total entropy of time, was the only thing they truly feared. They began to scan Mark's device with billions of nanobeams. Inside the device sat an empty ration box, a few blinking LEDs from a toy, and an old mechanical watch. But Mark knew their logic was too perfect for their own good. They couldn't believe anyone would walk into the heart of their power with nothing. To them, a bluff was an impossible human concept. They saw the potential for destruction because they were too intelligent to recognize a fool. The human had done the unthinkable. He turned their own superior intelligence against them. For the next several hours, something occurred that would be whispered about in the corners of the galaxy for eons. Mark, standing on the battered deck of his shuttle, began to teach the gods about sacrifice. He didn't speak in equations. He spoke of the ache of loss and the electric joy of rescue. Alice watched from her glass cell, tears tracing paths through the dust on her cheeks. She saw a common man holding the entire Galactic Council hostage with nothing but his words and his courage. Mark's stories of Earth, the smell of rain on hot asphalt, the sound of a heartbeat in the dark, began to overheat the Archon's analytical cores. He was injecting the virus of humanity into their sterile logic. The Archons reached a stalemate. Their calculations showed that the risk of losing 40% of the galaxy due to Mark's detonator, which they were now convinced was a localized singularity, outweighed the need to punish Alice. For the first time in 10 billion years, perfect justice failed. Object 74 Alice, the High Judge intoned, its light flickering with an unfamiliar frequency. Your sentence is altered. We cannot erase you, for the cost is our own existence. You are banished to Sector 0, a realm where time has no master. Go with this madman who chose to gamble with the stars. The glass cube dissolved into a flurry of light. Alice felt the heavy thud of the shuttle's deck beneath her feet. The smell of recycled air and old coffee was the sweetest thing she had ever experienced. Mark tossed the detonator into a corner, where it rattled pathetically. Was that a cookie tin? Alice whispered, throwing her arms around him. Yeah, Mark laughed, wiping sweat from his brow. But Archons are too smart for their own good. They believe in reasons. I just gave them a reason to be afraid of a shadow. They fled, but the peace was short-lived. The Archons, unable to accept defeat, designated them as an ideological contagion. While they were technically free, the judges sent Seraphim, 7 after them, an autonomous unit of pure logic whose body was made of liquid light. Seraphim felt no fear and didn't care for bluffs. His mission wasn't to kill them, but to recalibrate them, to strip away their individuality and prove to the universe that Mark's victory was a fluke. They were now fugitives, drifting on the edge of the galaxy. They arrived at the edge of known space, at a sector where stars were dying, turning into dim red embers. Station Last Chance was a derelict mining outpost, a haven for the forgotten and the brave. Here, Alice began to build a real device. She realized that to fight Seraphim, 7, she didn't need a bomb, she needed a randomness generator. She was building a machine that worked on the principle of human unpredictability. A device that translated emotions into fluctuating quantum fields. The station's atmosphere suddenly plummeted in temperature. The air grew so clean it burned the lungs. Through the metal walls, a blinding white glow began to seep. Seraphim, 7 had found them. He didn't use doors, he simply phased through the molecular structure of the station. Mark, Alice, his voice rang out like the chiming of silver bells. Your existence is statistical noise. I have come to harmonize you. Mark fired his blaster, but the beam of energy passed through the hunter's shield as if it were nothing. Now! Alice screamed. She slammed the contact on her device, connecting it to the station's main reactor. She wasn't trying to destroy Seraphim. She did what no Archon expected, she began to broadcast a chaotic stream of human sensory data into the hunter's neural network, songs, screams of joy, the sound of rain, the taste of salt. Seraphim, 7 froze. His perfect logical circuits began to loop, trying to compute the value of a mother's lullaby or the scent of a forest after a storm. The station groaned under the energy surge. Mark walked toward the paralyzed hunter. He didn't raise his weapon. He simply spoke. You are perfect, Mark said, his voice echoing in the chamber. But you are dead. You have never felt thirst. You have never looked at someone and feared for their life more than your own. You are just a digit in someone else's ledger. These words, carried on the emotional wave of Alice's device, became a lethal virus for Seraphim's logic. The blinding white light of the Seraphim began to soften. It turned a warm, golden hue, reminiscent of a sunset. His form shifted, becoming more organic, more human. He lowered the hand that had been ready to vaporize them. I feel, wait, Seraphim whispered. His voice was no longer a bell, but a breath. Order is only the silence of the grave. I no longer wish to be your hunter. He vanished, but not back to the Archons. He went into the dark to find his own soul. The Archons, terrified by the loss of their greatest hunter, sealed the entire sector. They declared it the zone of irrational infection. They no longer tried to kill Mark and Alice, they feared them. They feared that a human could do something even more unthinkable, like making the stars themselves feel love or loneliness. The Archons withdrew into their mathematical shells, leaving the infectious humans to thrive in the dark. Word of the human who bluffed the gods and converted a seraphim spread across the cosmos. Other oppressed species, those tired of the cold rule of the Archons, began to gravitate toward the last chance sector. A new civilization began to grow, not one built on perfect equations, but on the symphonies of biological chaos. Station Last Chance became the capital of a new age, where flaws were celebrated as the birthplace of creativity. Alice became the lead engineer of this new world. She designed engines that ran on hope frequency and sensors that could detect the emotional state of a nebula. She was no longer just an engineer, she was the weaver of paradoxes. She taught the galaxy that matter and mind were not separate, but two sides of the same beautiful mistake. Every device she built carried a piece of the unthinkable spirit that had saved her life. As the decades passed, Mark and Alice grew old. To the Archons, aging was a defect to be corrected. But to them, it was a badge of honor. Every gray hair was a victory over the static eternity of the judges. They lived with the knowledge that their time was limited, and that made every touch, every word, and every glance infinitely more valuable. They taught the immortal beings around them that the beauty of a flower comes from the fact that it will eventually wilt. The rusted wanderer now sat in a museum at the heart of the new capital. It no longer flew, but its hull still carried the radiation of 1,000 suns. Children from across the galaxy would touch its cold metal and hear the story of the captain who challenged the divine with an empty cookie tin. It became a symbol, that no matter how small you are, you can change the universe if you are brave enough to be irrational. On her deathbed, Alice looked out at a nebula that had turned golden, reflecting the joy of the civilization she helped build. Mark held her hand, his own shaking with age. They were not afraid. They had done the unthinkable, they had lived. The Archons were still counting stars, but Mark and Alice were part of the stars. Their story was the final proof: the universe doesn't need to be perfect, it just needs to be loved.